My top 25 of college football post week 4. Let's go ahead and get right into it. Number 25, Boise State. Ashton Jeanty is the best running back in the country right now. Top 10 in yards, top 10 in yards per carry, top 10 in scoring. It's unreal what he's able to do with Boise State. They are a real threat to beating Power 4 teams. We saw what they looked like versus Oregon, who I think is a top 10 team. They needed a game-winning field goal to beat Boise State, and I'm very surprised that they're this good this quickly. Obviously, Ashton Jeanty is the reason that they are this good so fast, but Boise State, top 25. I think the winner of the Mountain West will end up being the college football playoff representative, and I've got a feeling that Boise State is definitely going to be in that running. That's why I've got them at number 25. Number 24, Washington State. Now, in spite of being in the Pac-12 with just 2 teams, Washington State has got a lot to say this year. They have 2 great wins versus Texas Tech and Washington, and their quarterback, John Mateer, has more total yards than Cam Ward and more total touchdowns than Jackson Dart. Really impressive stuff from Washington State. And now I did talk about Boise State being the group of 5 representative, but Washington State, whether you like it or not, can make the college football playoff. All they got to do is win out, and their schedule looks like they could do that, especially with how they've performed so far this year. Number 23, UCF. Now, if this was a group of 5 team, I would say they're by far the favorite, but they're in the Big 12 now. It's a little worrisome on whether or not they can get there, but their running game is the best in the country. KJ Jefferson was a massive addition to this offense. So far, they're leading college football in rushing yards per game, 375 yards on the ground, game in and game out. They're controlling the line of scrimmage, and it just seems like this team is unstoppable. They had a close game versus TCU, but going into this week versus Colorado, I've got a lot of hope and faith in UCF so far. Number 22, Nebraska. Although they had a very disappointing loss versus Illinois, it came in overtime, and they have a young quarterback who didn't make a lot of mistakes. I have faith that Matt Rule can keep this Nebraska team competitive for the rest of the year. I believe that they're an 8-win, maybe even a 9-win team. It's going to be tough with that Illinois loss, but Dylan Raiola is probably going to go down as a top 5 true freshman quarterback of all time. I'm a big fan of his. His passing game is so far advanced to anybody else I've seen at the freshman level. So number 22, that's Nebraska. Moving on, number 21, this is out of respect. I had a lot of doubts about this team, but they come in and prove me wrong. The BYU Cougars dominated Kansas State in their head-to-head matchup on Saturday. They created a lot of turnovers, punt return touchdown. That punt return touchdown was insane. If you haven't seen it, go look it up. Absolutely crazy stuff, like a 90-yard punt return touchdown. But they are right now number 2 in all of college football in luck. So I don't know how long BYU will stay in my top 25 because I don't know if they can continue to win games at this rate. But right now, out of respect, they're number 21 on my list. Number 20, Kansas State. It doesn't matter the head-to-head matchup between BYU and Kansas State. That was an absolute freak game from Kansas State. They allowed a punt return touchdown. They had a fumble, 2 interceptions. They were 0 for 3 on 4th downs, I believe. It's really situational stuff like that that ends up being the difference maker in the game. And when you lose the turnover battle and you can't convert on 4th down, you're going to lose the football game, especially with special teams differential there. I think Kansas State is better than BYU, and they're probably better than number 20 in the country, but that was an alarming loss. They got the doors blown off of them, but they did outgain BYU. I think that's something to be said, and that's why I still think that they're a better football team. Let's go ahead and move on to number 19 on my list, and that's the LSU Tigers. A lot of people have LSU higher, but these games that they are supposed to blow teams out, it's still pretty close. At halftime versus UCLA, 17-17. UCLA went and got their bell rung versus Indiana, and LSU can't blow them out of the water. To me, that's a red flag. I've seen this LSU team disappoint time and time again. They did not look good versus South Carolina. They definitely didn't look good versus USC. I have a lot of worries, but the offense is coming together, and the difference maker right now and why LSU is not performing at a very high level is because of their sloppy play. Penalties, bad defensive schemes, turnovers. I mean, it's a it's appalling what this coaching job has, or what this coaching staff has done to this team so far. LSU has to get more discipline. Their players have to be in the right spots, and this could be a top 15 team, but not right now. That's why I've got them at number 19. I've got to see them win a couple more games in convincing fashion before I can really start to respect them as a college football playoff contender. Number 18, Illinois. Luke Altmaier has proved me wrong yet again. He outdueled Dylan Raiola on the road, and it seems to me that he's really coming to his own, and you know what? I'm proud of him. He's doing great stuff for Illinois. Now, I'm confident that Illinois is not going to be a Big Ten championship contender, but what they've done so far, similar to BYU, they get my respect. I think that they can continue to win games. They're definitely making a bowl game. This is an 8 to 9 win team. They just have a very tough end of the year schedule. So number 18, Illinois. Number 17, USC. Now, I'm back to questioning whether or not Lincoln Riley can be the head coach of a football team. The USC defense came into this game, should have been prepared to stop the run. Everybody knew Michigan is going to run the football. And versus LSU, USC did a great job of stopping the run. So when you face up against a one-dimensional team, I'm expecting that USC's defense is going to stop that. They did not. Michigan ran the football over and over and over again. They only passed for 32 yards and still won that game. Now, the one caveat that I'll give USC was that it was on the road in one of the toughest places to play in all of college football. That's why I'm giving them a break right now. But number 17 USC, they got to prove something to me before I can give them the benefit of the doubt. Now, speaking of the benefit of the doubt, I'm going to give it to number 16, Clemson. Now, if you go back and watch that Georgia game, Clemson was going toe-to-toe with Georgia for the first 2.5-ish quarters, and then the floodgates opened wide open. So I think that Dabo Swinney, the haters out there in the world, yes, the criticism is deserved, but this is not the Clemson team of old. This is not top 5 recruiting class year in and year out in the country. But what they are doing is having top 5, top 3 recruiting classes in the ACC. I think that Clemson is an ACC contender. They've scored 66 and 59 points in their last 2 games. I definitely think that Cade Klubnik is a good starting quarterback and has proved a lot of haters wrong over the last couple of games. The problem with Clemson is they cannot have any freak accidents and lose any more games. I think that they can contend for an ACC title. Currently, Miami is my favorite, but the second best team in the ACC is Clemson. Dabo is turning this team into a culture-building, team-building, player-motivating type program where you have guys come in and you develop them, very similar to what Jim Harbaugh did with Michigan. However, I do think Clemson going forward has to get involved in the portal and NIL, but that's a topic for another day. Let's talk about number 15, Iowa State. This is one of the most balanced teams in college football. I love what this offense has been able to do so far with Rocco Becht. He's pretty experienced, and what he was able to do in the second half of the Iowa game was very impressive to me, and that's something that I haven't forgotten about. The defense looks extremely good. I definitely think that secondary is one of the better ones in the country. Iowa State is currently 4th in the country in passing yards allowed per game, and that's a great sign that they can shut down other Big 12 offenses. Now, they haven't really played some explosive teams yet, but once they do, we'll get a good measure on how good this team is. They're a potential top 10 for me in the future, so look out for Iowa State. Number 14, Louisville. The first test of the season, Georgia Tech comes into town, and they've been one of the better teams, but Louisville handled business and yet again held the Yellow Jackets under 100 yards rushing, which is what they are known for. Their head coach, Brent Key, offensive lineman, loves to run the football, and Louisville completely shut that down. Tyler Show, a transfer that's come in under head coach Jeff Brom for Louisville, has been very efficient. He's playing high-octane football versus Georgia Tech, 13 for 19, over 250 yards. And I definitely think that Louisville has a chance to go in to touchdown Jesus and beat Notre Dame next week. look out for that team. They're going to be a little dangerous, especially in the ACC. Next up, Michigan. This is a completely one-dimensional offense, but as of right now, it's working. They had a really bad loss versus Texas, but that USC win gives me confidence that Michigan can go down throughout the rest of their schedule and win games, except for maybe Ohio State. I definitely think that Michigan is going to have to develop part of their passing game. 32 yards is not going to cut it, especially if you want to contend for a Big Ten championship. But this is obviously a down year, and to be up here at number 13 for me, that's impressive stuff. Will Johnson is still a top 5 player in the country. He had yet another pick 6 versus USC that ended up being the difference maker in that game. So number 13, Michigan, they get a lot of props from me right now. Number 12, Missouri. Now, after beating Vanderbilt in double overtime, the alarm bells are going off. It's screaming every single place in the country. This team is not ready to contend for a national championship. I still think that they could make the college football playoff based off their schedule, but they're going to have to get a lot better on the defensive side of things. Their offense looks pretty good. Running back Nate Noel has come up big in all of these tough spots, and Luther Burden III is still the best receiver in the country, in my opinion. Big game versus Vanderbilt. Overall, the defense has got to get better. Eventually, they will have to go into some opposing team stadium like in Alabama and face a really tough test and win that game. I think the first one they've got on their schedule is Texas A&M. So I've got to see it to believe it, but right now I will leave Missouri at number 12 just because every other expert in the country has got them in their top 10. I'm going to put them a few spots down just because Vanderbilt, man, that was a close game and it definitely shouldn't have been. Number 11, haters hate, I don't care, Notre Dame. Now, it seems that slow starts for this team are commonplace. They had a really slow start versus Miami, Ohio yet again, but they did handle business. They won 28-3. Riley Leonard has been great on his legs, but if Notre Dame wants to contend for this playoff spot that they're expected to get, he's got to be better with his arm. Up against some of the best teams in the country, Notre Dame is going to need to throw the ball at a high level and score 28 to 35 points. And as of right now, I haven't seen them do that versus a top 25 opponent. Versus Texas A&M, they ran the football a lot, and Riley Leonard didn't look that impressive with his arm. They still won that game 20-13, but you go up against a Miami, a Alabama, an Ohio State, a Georgia, an Ole Miss. You've got to score points, and right now, I haven't seen Notre Dame do that. Hopefully going forward in a couple of these cupcake games, their offense can all get on the same page and they can get a better chemistry and score more points. But as of right now, that's yet to be seen. That's why I've got them at number 11 and not higher, because I definitely think their defense is top 5 in the country. Moving on, let's talk about Penn State. The Bowling Green game was atrocious, and last week I said I needed to see it to believe it, that they could go in and handle business versus a non-conference group of 5 opponent, and they did that versus Kent State, won 56-0. Given the competition, that's what the Nittany Lions are supposed to do, but the defense only gave up 66 total yards the entire game. Very impressive. This is a get-right matchup heading into conference play. Drew Aller has shown me that he can do enough to win games, but I want to see if he could be the difference maker in beating a top 25 team, in beating a Michigan, an Ohio State, an Oregon, whatever that may be. I want to see him step up in that spot and have 250 yards plus passing and honestly 3 or 4 touchdowns either in the air or on the ground. So Penn State number 10, I want to see them do better versus tougher opponents. Let's see if they can do that. Number 9, Oregon. Now, off of bye week, the Ducks finally have a chance to get the motor humming versus UCLA, who is not that great of a team. Everyone saw what Oregon State had to say in the first half, but Oregon came out and threw the haymaker in the second half and beat the dog out of the Beavers. I definitely think that second half Oregon team is what everybody expected them to be throughout this season. It's been a slow start, but it seems that they've got the ball rolling now, and I think that Oregon is a top 10 team. Dylan Gabriel has been extremely efficient I think he still leads the country in completion percentage. If not, he's pretty damn close. I am a big fan of his. I'm a believer in Oregon. I think Oregon can be a top 10 team and go up against an Ohio State and potentially win. But the clock is ticking on how many more slip-ups this Oregon team can have, because Ohio State is looming and they've got to get their ducks in a row before that game. Wink. Number 8, Utah. Let's talk about this Utah team. Even without Cam Rising, the Utes went on the road against a top 25 opponent in Oklahoma State and turned what many thought would be one of the best running backs in college football into a non-factor. Now, Oklahoma State has by all means not had a great season so far, but the fact that Utah can go on the road and perform this way without their star starting quarterback, that's a great sign. When Cam Rising comes back, man, hopefully he comes back this week or the next, this Utah team will look completely different and even better than they already are. That's why I've got them at number 8. They could be a contender for a national championship, but I have to see a healthy Cam Rising for at least 3 straight weeks. I haven't seen it in almost 2 years, so gonna have to see it pretty soon. Let's talk about number 7, Ole Miss. Good old Ole Miss is number 7 on my list. This is the first national championship contender on my list. I definitely think that Ole Miss can go and beat a Georgia, an Alabama, an Ohio State, a Miami. Doesn't matter who I've got on this list. I think Ole Miss can stand toe-to-toe with any of them. But over Lane Kiffin's tenure, Ole Miss is 1-3 against top 10 opponents and 5-5 against top 25 opponents. And I don't even think that's counting his first year. That's correct. Since his second year, 5-5 against top 25 opponents and 1-3 against top 10 opponents. That's not good enough in my opinion. I'm going to have to see this Ole Miss team go toe-to-toe with Georgia in a few weeks and win. It's a home game. Jackson Dart has looked like the best quarterback in college football. And I'm a firm believer that he is going to continue to show out. Ole Miss leads the country in yards per game, and I think they lead the country in scoring now. If not, they're top 5. So Ole Miss, their defenses look great. They played great against Georgia State, Wake Forest, but they have not yet to play a conference game or another top 25 team. Got to see it to believe it, but they are a national title contender for me. Next up, Georgia at number 6. Nobody else in the country, I don't think, has Georgia this low, but this Bulldogs team is riddled with injuries, including their best player, offensive guard Tate Rutledge. He was a big factor in the Kentucky game. When he went out, that run game fell apart, and I definitely think going into Alabama this week, it's going to be a very tough path to victory, especially without him. Georgia's defense has still performed regardless of injuries. They've clamped opponents under 6 points a ton of times, and I think that they can do it again versus Alabama. Maybe not under 6 points, but they could definitely swallow up the Jalen Milroe offense. But if Carson Beck can play like the Heisman hopeful that he is supposed to be, this Georgia team will be exactly what they are, and that is the national championship favorite. I just have them at number 6 right now because they did not look great versus Kentucky, and they are riddled with injuries. They're missing their backup running back, offensive guard. They've got a ton of defensive injury questions, including their best pass rusher, Mikael Williams. So that's why I've got Georgia at number 6. Number 5, Alabama. After a scare versus South Florida in the fourth quarter and in the Wisconsin game, Alabama's offense has kicked it into high gear. The ground game looks incredible, and I think that they look like a top 5 team. That's why I've got them here at number 5. The Crimson Tide by no means are a first half team, but if they can weather the storm like they did versus USF, like they did versus Wisconsin, they are going to come out in the second half and punch you square in the mouth. That's why I've got them at number 5. The big question for me is, can they get the penalties down? They've been very sloppy. I think a lot has changed here with a new head coach and a new offensive system. Their defense looks great. High turnovers, and on top of that, one of the best linebacking units in the country. Actually, I think that they're the best. I think Deontay Lawson is a top 5 middle linebacker in the country. very good at IDing plays, gets to the football. Jahad Campbell can fly. I think this Alabama team is one of the better ones of the last 5 years, and that's why I've got them in number 5. But a team better than them, number 4, Ohio State. Like a lot of other teams, Ohio State hasn't really reached the level of competition that some other guys have, but they have a new offensive coordinator, a new quarterback, a new wide receiver 1. They have a new stacked running back room. There's a lot of change on this Ohio State team, and what I want to see is when the going gets tough, can they persevere? I think that they can. I'm a big fan of Chip Kelly. I know he didn't work out as a head coach in the NFL or as the head coach at UCLA, but he has a really good offensive mind. And so far, this Ohio State playbook has been very creative and explosive. They're using their star freshman wide receiver. Will Howard looks seamless into this offense. So Ohio State at number 4, I want to see them play a Penn State, an Oregon, a Michigan, whatever. If they can win those games, man, they're going to be tough to beat in the playoffs. Number 3, like it or not, the Miami Hurricanes are a top 3 team in college football right now. I know nobody wants to admit Miami's back, but man, Cam Ward looks phenomenal. Great. Look, it's a star-studded team. Xavier Restrepo, they've got Damian Martinez in the backfield. Their tight end core is pretty great. Their defense is amazing. They lead the country in sacks, I believe, 16 total sacks, and they've played some tougher opponents versus Florida and versus USF. Wow, they looked dominant. 41-17 versus Florida, 50-15 versus USF, which is something Alabama couldn't say. Man, Florida looks great. They are a second half team that makes a lot of adjustments, and I definitely think that that's something that's a positive. They don't really have that tough of a schedule in the ACC, so with health on their side, this is a national title contender. This is my ACC championship favorite, and Cam Ward is my Heisman favorite. I've got Miami here at number 3. Number 2, even without Quinn Ewers, Texas is still a top 3 team to me. Arch Manning doesn't leave a lot to be desired. Now, of course, he gets his first start versus Louisiana Monroe. That's nothing to write home about. But going into SEC play, I'm still confident that even without Quinn Ewers, Texas is the second best team in the conference. Their defense did a phenomenal job, especially their defensive line, who I thought would suffer from both of their star defensive tackles last year, including Tavondre Sweat, leaving for the NFL. I thought that D-line would suffer. They did not. They are stacked with talent. The offensive line looked great versus the Michigan defense. I think that regardless of who the quarterback is, the weapons on this team, the front 7 on the defense, the offensive line is going to carry them game in and game out to victory after victory. So Texas, number 2, Steve Sarkisian, may be the second best head coach in college football behind Kirby Smart. That's why I've got Texas at number 2. And number 1, and still number 1 in the country in my opinion, Tennessee. I said at the beginning of the year, Oklahoma had a top 5 defense in the country. I still believe that. And Tennessee still managed to get over 300 yards of offense on them. They put up 23 points. I think there was a defensive safety, but regardless, obviously that is a tough road test to go on the road to Oklahoma and win in dominant fashion, which is exactly what they did. The Tennessee defense, except for a little late in the game, looked flawless. Honestly, flawless. They had turnover after turnover. I love the fumbles. It was just great. I think Tennessee is a number 1 team, national championship contender. Right now, if you asked me who would win the Tennessee-Alabama game, I'm going with Tennessee. If you ask me right now if Tennessee could go into Georgia and win that football game later this year, I would say yes, they can. And it's because of Josh Heupel, who I think is the best mind in college football right now. The way that he is manipulating defenses is unlike any other coach, and that's why I've got Tennessee at number 1. That's my top 25. Thank you all so much for watching, and we will see you next time.